These are two of the lightest road bikes ever made. This is a 10-year-old Super 6 Evo, and this is a brand new 2023 Factor O2 van. But are modern bikes like this heavier, slower, more complex, and generally worse than old bikes like this, as some people will have you believe? Well, in this video, we're going to find out once and for all. I plan a series of tests for both bikes, and a winning bike in each test gets a point. And the bike with the most points at the end of the video wins. Simple. And why these two bikes? Because they are the lightest bikes of their generation. They both have a SRAM red group set. They both have carbon frame designed to be as light as possible. And they both have shallow carbon wheels. So nice, fair test. Before we dive into the comparison, this video is sponsored by SquareSpace. SquareSpace is the all-in-one platform that makes it dead easy and simple to build a professional looking website. Whether you run a bike shop and need an online store to take your business to the next level, you're a photographer and need a gallery, you have a bike brand, you want a cool portfolio to show off your products, Squarespace is a place to be. And building a website really is simple. There's a massive library of award-winning templates to get you up and running, and you customize how the website looks with a drag and drop interface. If I can do it, you can definitely do it. So if you want to elevate your website game this year, then Squarespace is a place to do it. And you get a free trial using the link down below. And if you enjoy it, there's a 10% discount code on screen right now. Okay, on with the video. So let's start with looks, the most subjective of my tests in the video. And for me, well, the old bike still wins the looks competition. I love the simple round tubes, the horizontal non-sloping top tube, and the non-dropped rear stays. I think it looks better than a modern bike with the aero profiles, the drop rear stays, and the sloping top tube. But one area where this bike has aged really badly is in the graphics and the paint job. It's a very loud, very shouty paint finish where I think the Factor does look better, but I think it's 1 point to the Super 6 Evo in this competition. Let me know if you disagree by leaving a comment down below. This is a 730 gram carbon frame, and this is a 695 gram carbon frame, and both have top of the range SRAM red group sets. But which one is actually lighter on the scales? They are the same size, 56 centimeter, no pedals, so a nice fair comparison. So let's start with the Factor. And that is 6.38 kilograms, which is very, very impressive for a bike with all the modern features on it. Let's see if that's heavier or lighter than a 10-year-old bike. 6.35 kilograms, more or less the same. So 10 years of evolution and the weights are actually the same, which is either a good thing or a bad thing depending on your point of view. Some might argue we should be on 4 or 5 kilogram bikes given how light this bike was back in 2012, but this bike of course has hydraulic disc brakes which are heavier than the rim brakes, electronic gears with batteries on each derailleur, the aero profiles, so actually quite impressive that this bike is the same weight as this bike with all the advances this one has. So 1 point to the Factor O2 van. But modern bikes are expensive compared to old bikes. I can hear you writing in the comments below. So let's look at these two bikes in comparison. This Evo, when launched in 2012 with the top of the range SRAM red mechanical group set and some carbon fiber wheels and carbon handlebar and seat post and other bits and pieces, costs £8,800, which in today's money is £12,000. So a lot of money. This bike with a SRAM red ETAP access group set and carbon wheels is £11,800, or with a power meter it's £12,200. So more or less the same amount of money, which shows that top-end bikes were expensive back in 2012 and they're still expensive today. And that really surprised me because generally modern bikes are more expensive than they used to be, thanks to things like Brexit and a pandemic and other issues. But I'm really surprised that this bike here is actually a bit cheaper, albeit only £200 than the 10-year-old bike. So it's a point to the Factor, as crazy as that sounds. The group set on each bike is an area where the bikes have really evolved a lot in the last 10 years. And this comparison is good because both have top of the range SRAM red group sets fitted. Over on the Evo is a mechanical shifting 11-speed setup with rim brakes, and still one of the lightest group sets ever made. And it still works really well. And there's lots of features I like about that. But once you've tried electronic shifting, it really is hard to go back to mechanical, as nice as that group set is. The shifting on this electronic group set is more intuitive than the old double tap on the mechanical group set. The gear ratios on the new bike suit modern needs better than the old race gears on that Evo. And the only real downside are the batteries need charging occasionally. This group set is nowhere near as light as that old SRAM group set as well, especially with the high hydraulic disc brakes. But riding that bike alongside this one, as we'll find out later, the brakes on this bike are way better than the rim brakes on that bike. And I know that'll set the comments alight for sure. So I'm going to call this one a draw, 1 point apiece, because I love the simplicity and the mechanical shifting and the weight of the old group set, but I do prefer electronic shifting and the gear ratios and the brakes on this modern group set. Let's talk about comfort, and this is a really interesting comparison. So when the Evo came out, I was always amazed at how smooth and how much comfort the bike offered for what is essentially a race bike. And although not as smooth as an endurance bike like the Synapse of the time, it still offered a surprisingly smooth ride for a bike of this genre. But times have moved on quite a bit, and while this bike was smooth back in 2012, it's not as smooth as this bike in 2023. And one of the big differences is the tyre size. So the Evo, when it first came out, would only take up to a 25mm wide tyre, and I used to ride it mostly with a 23 back in those days at 120 psi. How crazy we were back then. But today, a 28mm wide tyre is standard, whether for an amateur like myself or for a professional in the pro peloton. These are 28s, and a frame, as is common with most race bikes these days, like a Tarmac and a TCR and a Namonda, will take up to a 32mm wide tyre, so you can go wider if you want. And that difference in tyre width is a big reason why the Factor is much smoother on my local rough roads. But there's also differences in the frame design, the improvements in carbon fibre manufacturing, the tube shapes, the seat mask, the handlebar, which also contribute to the smoothness this bike offers compared to this one. And this Factor isn't even the smoothest bike in the category either. Compared to my TCR, the Tarmac SL8, this bike is really quite hard and quite firm and occasionally harsh as well. So there's 1 point to the modern bike when it comes to comfort. Right, onto brakes, and one of the biggest changes on road bikes in the last 10 years, and one of the biggest, hottest debates on the internet for sure. So 10 years ago, rim brakes on road bikes were king, but today we now have high hydraulic disc brakes, which are pretty much standard on all road bikes. And hand on the heart here, guys, I'm going to say that disc brakes are way better than rim brakes in all conditions, all weathers, all situations. And no, I'm not being paid by the manufacturers, the industry to say that. It's my own personal opinion based on years and years of testing hundreds of bikes around the world. And it's not just about stopping faster or having a shorter stopping distance with disc brakes. It's the way they feel and the ease they offer when you want to slow down and control your speed. They make braking easier and just safer than the brakes we had here. One finger braking compared to 2 or 3 finger braking in some situations with rim brakes is far better, in my opinion, whether riding the dry or the wet, doing mountain riding down big descents or riding my local country lanes. Disc brakes are just nicer and a better experience in my opinion. So for me, there's 1 point to modern bikes for better brakes. Back in 2012, aerodynamics wasn't really the buzzword it is today on road bikes, and Evo had no concessions to aerodynamics at all. It was designed to be as light, stiff, strong and smooth as possible, with simple round tubes, lots of external cables and no integration to speak of. Whereas 10 years later, the Factor O2 VAM has aero everywhere. So an aero optimized frame, the shape of a down tube, the drop rear stage, the fork blades, a head tube, and of course, full internal cable routing with a one-piece carbon handlebar and stem. So on paper and in a wind tunnel, clearly the Factor will be a faster, less draggy bike than the old Evo. And out on the road, you do feel it occasionally at high speeds, that bike feels a bit faster, but really there's so many variables in the real world, and even in power and riding roads I know really well, it's really hard to get a feel of how much faster that bike is over that one. So I'm calling this one a win for the Factor based on the potential for that bike to be faster, but in the real world, probably not that much in it. Not as much as you might expect given 10 years of advances. And for the final test, what are they like to ride? Which is nicer, better, and faster?
Even though it's 10 years old, the Evo still feels amazing. It's fast, electric, and a thrill to ride. The carbon frame is just as snappy and responsive as it was when new. It definitely hasn't gone soft. The Factor also feels amazing. But the biggest difference from riding two bikes side by side is just how much smoother and more compliant and how better the ride experience generally is. The Evo sometimes feels edgy or crashy on fast roads and rough descents, but the Factor makes it a breeze. And maybe, thanks to a smoother ride, it doesn't feel as fast, but the clock and Strava don't lie. The new bike is definitely faster. And how much faster will depend on the riding you are doing. There's no mistaking the superior ride quality of the modern bike versus the old bike.
The modern bike gives a nicer, more pleasant experience. It's smoother, more control from the tyres, better gear ratios, better brakes, just a nicer experience full stop. So it's a point to the modern bike. So clearly road bikes have changed a lot in the last 10 years, but which is best? Well, let's add up the scores and find out. And yes, the Factor outscores the old Evo. Are you surprised by the results, shocked by the results? And if you scored both bikes using the categories I've outlined in the video, let me know how your score would differ by leaving a comment down below. But regardless of the differences between the two bikes, they're each amazing to ride. And if bike tech has stopped here 10 years ago, and this is a bike we're riding today, I'd still be happy. But personally, I'm glad bikes have evolved into this, because this is nicer to ride than that bike. And the differences between these two bikes will differ depending on your point of view and your personal experience and what you look for when riding a bike. But for me, the modern bike is just a nicer experience, a more pleasant ride than the old bike, as nice as this bike is. And this bike is never leaving my stable. I love it so much. Just a reminder of how bikes have changed in that time. I do wonder what the next 10 years will bring us. Well, hopefully I'll be here reporting on those bikes in the future. And if you want to help support the channel, you can do that by hitting the subscribe button down below. And if you want to see a review of this Factor here and find out more about how it rides, then do watch the video right up here. But that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again very soon.